The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi, and welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. I am Tony Palmeri from the Department of Communication at UW-Oshkosh, and I'm sitting in for Cheryl Hentz. Keep Cheryl in your thoughts. She's recovering from surgery. We know that she's fine, and she looks forward to returning in probably about 3 or 4 weeks or so. Speaking of surgery, the Republican Party sure performed an operation on the voters recently on Election Day. Doing extremely well at the state and national level. And of course, the big ticket race was Governor Scott Walker's re-election. He defeated Mary Burke by about a 52 to 47% margin. But it wasn't just the governor's race. Republicans did well down the ticket. Gordon Hintz, a Democrat, was able to keep his seat in the 54th district, but it was probably a lot closer than he was comfortable with. And there were many other things that happened on Election Day, including the fact that voters passed some referendum questions locally and at the national level that were quite liberal. At the same time, they elected mostly Republicans to office. Well, here to sort all this out with me is UW-Oshkosh Professor of Political Science, Dr. Jim Simmons. He's an expert on American politics, published extensively in that area, and we've always been able to count on him for words of wisdom on these matters. Jim, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I miss Cheryl, but I'll...
Yeah, we all miss Cheryl. She will be back. But let's start with the governor's race. So what's your general analysis of why Scott Walker won the election?
If you look at the voting map, it's the same map as 2010, 2012, and now again for the recall. The same issues that worked for Walker in the previous 2 elections were working for him again.
What issues were those?
Well, you have to recall that this is a midterm election, so the voter turnout is a big change from a presidential election.
Right.
And Democrats have a serious problem with midterm off-year elections, that fewer younger voters, fewer voters of color. You know, the voter turnout in some of the bloc Republican areas was as high as it ever was, but the Democratic voters are less reliable, particularly in Milwaukee. And
so there was some dispute in the Democratic Party as to whether Mary Burke was a strong candidate or a weak candidate. From what you're saying, it almost sounds like it didn't even matter who the Democrats
didn't
nominated.
matter. Yeah, the fact is that the voters are so polarized in Wisconsin that any generic Democrat would have gotten 47% of the vote or more.
So talk about that. You've been working with the Oshkosh Northwestern on this Wisconsin Divided project,
Sure.
which is analyzing polarization in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. How did the state become so polarized?
Well, it's not just the state. Across the country, you know, voters have become more consistent. Voters have sorted themselves out. The cities have moved more Democratic, and suburbs and rural areas more Republican. And liberals more liberal, conservatives more conservative. It's, you know, the number of undecided or independent voters who really could be persuaded has declined.
How did this happen? I mean, is it money in elections? Is it the redistricting? I mean, how did this happen?
No, I think it's a nationwide trend where, you look at the national parties, and there used to be Southern Democrats, liberal Republicans, and all of that, and that is no longer the case. The parties are truly partisan. If you are even perceived as someone who is less than consistent with a party, like Tom Petri, congressman,
Right.
you expect to be primaried. You expect to face someone from your own party, which may be more threat to you than if you.
Right, right. And yet, so all right. So the Republican Party, liberals have been banished. Even moderates have pretty much disappeared.
I mean, the most moderate Democrat is more liberal than the most moderate Republican in
Right.
both political parties.
But the Republican Party, so it sounds like the Republican Party has moved pretty far right.
They've
Okay.
shifted to the right.
But the Democratic Party, it seems to me, has not moved far left.
They seem to have not moved at all.
No, they're a moderate. Would you call them a moderate party?
A centrist party, sure.
Okay, so what happened to the liberals in the Democratic Party? Do too many of them stay home in the off years?
One of the things that it looks like the Democrats are really concerned about nominating a moderate who has some chance of being elected in a general election.
Right.
Mark Harris, Schraber.
Candidates don't really excite anybody.
No.
I mean, they're decent people, smart people.
Mary Burke,
Right.
self-funded, relatively moderate, as far as Democrats go, relatively centrist.
Right.
The Republicans really feel that, to elect someone, you have to be out front with your position on the issues. You have to have a message which is consistent. And
But it sounds like what you're saying is that Walker is benefiting from the fact that he has been running in off-year elections. That if he was running in a presidential election year, Burke could have conceivably won that race.
absolutely. The fact is that since 1988, Democrats have won the
Yeah.
presidential, electors in Wisconsin, but during that time, Republicans have won
So, all
seven
right.
out of.
So Tammy Baldwin, she's about as liberal a Democrat as you're going to get these days, right?
Exactly.
So Tammy Baldwin defeats Tommy Thompson, but that was in a presidential election year.
Presidential election.
Had they run this year, Thompson may have won that race.
Yes. I think that's right.
So how did the Democrats overcome this calendar problem?
Well, they really can't. I mean,
All right.
in most states, the governor is elected off year,
Mm-hmm.
and it was intended so that you'd focus on, the governorship and the state politics as opposed to linking that with the presidential race.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that's worked.
Sure.
Because,
All right, so now we do have a Governor Scott Walker for a second four-year term. What kind of policy agenda do you expect?
Well, you have unified government. You now have a supermajority in the assembly with 63 out of the
Yeah,
99.
the Republicans gained seats in the assembly.
They gained seats. They gained seats in the Senate, and not only that, but they gained seats in the open seats where incumbents weren't running on the Republican side. The replacements are more conservative than the incumbents.
Yeah, I mean, I think before the election it was 60 to 39 in the assembly.
Yeah.
Now it's 63 to 36.
Yeah.
I mean, the Democrats now
Yeah.
can have a small group gathering somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's called a supermajority now. for
Supermajority.
Republicans.
I mean,
With
it would be veto proof if they didn't hold the governorship. So essentially, the governor can,
Well, in the Senate, is it now 1914?
1914.
All right, that's so these are big majorities.
These are pickup.
Right.
And Mike Ellis and
Yeah,
Dale Schultz.
Dale Schultz, the relatively moderate Republicans,
Sure.
they're gone.
They're gone.
So pretty much what you're saying, Jim, is that the Republicans right now in Wisconsin can do pretty much whatever the hell they want.
Whatever. And the governor's going to move very quickly on his.
All right,
agenda.
so he kept insisting that he wasn't going to push for things like making Wisconsin a right-to-state law.
Right to work.
Right to work, I'm sorry.
Right to work.
Right-to-work law, right?
I'm guessing he might go forward with that.
He might go for that. All right, what
But
else?
It's not his priority. There are other things that he.
All right,
would
what is
prefer.
his priority, do you think?
Well, I think if he had won narrowly, then his prospects for higher office were not great, but he won by a substantial margin between 5 and 6 points. So now he is a serious contender for higher office.
Oh, so you expect that? And actually, his victory speech that night did sound like the opening salvo in a
Sure.
presidential campaign. He
As
was
did his
running
book.
against Washington.
Yeah, as was his book. Yeah.
Yeah, his book was also. So, if he wants to enter the presidential race, the Iowa caucuses would be the first major
Sure.
event, right? Was that like
Right.
15 months from now, 18 months
Yeah.
from now? So when would he have to start mounting a serious campaign?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. All right.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of this kind of campaign, what you have to put together, the number of contenders, the race for the presidency almost begins when the election for the current president ends.
Right. All right. So do you expect that Scott Walker, I anticipate that he will enter at least the caucus and the New Hampshire primary.
I would imagine too.
All right. How do you think he looks compared to the rest of that field? We're talking about maybe Chris Christie, Jeb Bush. Those are the big guys, right?
Yeah, you never know about this until you see 7 or 8 candidates,
Right.
in the fields in Iowa and debates and so on.
Right.
So,
But they're going to have fewer debates this time, from what I've heard.
They are, because
Yeah.
they felt that so many debates really undercut their campaign.
Yeah, it
last
became
time.
like freak shows. I mean,
Sure,
some of these guys were
exactly.
just empty suits, like Rick Perry and all that.
Yeah, but it looks like the candidates this time are more respectable and they're less likely to.
So, do you expect that a Scott Walker, would he attract that Southern, very conservative base? The Southern
Actually,
Baptists? He is the son of a minister.
He is, but I think really his campaign is going to revolve around Act 10, the decertification essentially of labor unions, his taking on public schools.
What I think works against him, Jim, is that the Wisconsin corporate media to me has not been as rigorous with him, as much of a watchdog as they should be. I don't think that Scott Walker can withstand the national media spotlight. I think they will vet him in a way that the Wisconsin media has not.
Well, that's true of every presidential candidate. Whether it's Rand Paul, whether it's Rick Perry, they don't understand the kind of scrutiny they're going to receive until they're actually a presidential candidate.
In there, right? All right, let's talk about another race from Tuesday, and that was the 6th congressional district with Mark Harris, the Winnebago County executive, running as a Democrat, and Glenn Grothman, the victor of the race, who was a state senator from West Bend, very much on the far right of the Republican Party. Why was that race not closer than it was? It looked like Grothman won that very, very handily, even though Harris got a lot of newspaper endorsements. They're meaningless
He did.
now.
Well, newspaper endorsements don't move votes.
Yeah.
Does anyone really read newspaper editorials from the official?
No, they can't even give them away for free on our campus.
No. No, actually, although the Republicans hold 5 out of 8 congressional seats, this seat is the safest seat other than Jim Sensenbrenner's seat in terms of its voting.
The 6th CD
Yeah,
is the safest.
other than Sensenbrenner's seat. And they actually increased the lean Republican of the seat in the last go-round.
Well, Petri had been in that seat since 1979,
35 years,
I believe.
yeah.
And just to talk about him for a second, he's getting all these accolades for being some great, congressman. I mean, I thought he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
But when the history books are written, what's Tom Petri's legacy
Well, it's
for all those years that he's been in there?
It's different now than it was back when he was first elected, because he was a liberal Republican when he was first elected, and a Ripon Society Republican. He thought that the party needed to modernize. He even debated Bill Buckley
Right.
on firing line, and
Right.
over time he has shifted with his party in a more conservative direction. And his voting record was at least as conservative as Ryan's, and yet he wasn't vocal enough about this, and so he drew a primary opponent.
But wouldn't you expect that he'd been in there for 30 years?
Yes.
Wouldn't you expect that around the 20th year or so, he would have moved into some top leadership positions? Like, for example, when John Boehner got moved into the leader of the Republicans in the House of Representatives, Petri had been there much longer than Boehner. Why wasn't Petri considered for that?
Well, in fact, he was relatively moderate. I mean, even though his voting record was over 90% with the majority of his party, that isn't enough. I mean, that isn't.
All right, well, his successor, Mr. Grothman, is certainly conservative, certainly on the right. So what do you expect from him in these first 2 years?
Mr. Grothman will not only vote with his party, but he'll be an initiator and a mover of legislation, as he was in the state legislature.
What do you expect him to move on?
Well, one of the best ways you know what someone is going to do. I know we're all cynical, but what is it that you propose doing when you're running for office? And I don't think Mr. Grothman has been shy about that. He's going to be moving on welfare, on food stamps, on,
the further dismantling of the Great Society.
Exactly.
But how much more dismantling of that? You're a scholar of American history and politics. If we look at the Great Society programs of the 1960s, right, other than Head Start, what really remains? I mean, Medicaid, right, if that was part of it.
Yeah. Well, we have to go back further. We have to go back to the New Deal, because it's Social Security, it's disability, it's a whole range of things that Mr. Grothman wants to take on.
Right, exactly. But yet, do you find it somewhat strange or ironic that the people over, say, 65 who vote in fairly big numbers in this country,
oh yes,
they clearly voted Republican majority this time,
and
they were voting for people who want to dismantle the very programs they benefit from? How would you explain that?
Well, part of it had to do with the Affordable Care Act, and the fact is that in the Affordable Care Act, there are going to be cost controls, and there are going to be taxes on some of the better policyholders. So, if you're already guaranteed these benefits, it's like, I have mine, and
keep the government out of my Medicare.
Exactly.
Those things. Well, so it sounds like you think Grothman is going to be an activist.
I do.
In the Congress.
I mean, he was very careful in the campaign. He did several debates, but he was careful in what he said. I can't think that he's going to be able to do that for 2 years.
Okay.
I think he's going to be a vocal congressman.
And yet you think that he's in a safe district.
He's in a very safe district.
Right. So the only hope then of removing him is to be primaried in the Republican primary.
Well, actually, I think the only one who can remove Glenn is Glenn himself.
By putting foot and mouth disease.
Well, by saying things. I mean, it can cost you if you're an extreme candidate, and 6 to 8 points, which is about where that difference is, that lean.
Sure.
And the higher turnout of a presidential election year.
Okay, we're going to get more to national issues in a few minutes here, but let's stay with the state for a second. The Attorney General, Brad Schimmel versus Susan Happ. Wisconsin historically has elected a Republican governor and a Democratic Attorney General. We did that with Thompson and Doyle for years. We've elected Democratic governor and Republican Attorney General. Now we elected a Republican to the Attorney General's office. Was Schimmel a stronger candidate? Did he benefit from the Republican wave? What was it?
Well, part of it is that the ticket splitting has been declining. I mean, people were voting straight ticket almost down the line. Even though we've eliminated, as of Act 10, eliminated straight party voting,
people are still doing it.
People still doing it.
Right.
I mean, it's more difficult to do now. You can't just fill in one circle and vote straight ticket, but people are voting straight ticket. And you're going to, I was even surprised to see Doug LaFollette save his position. I thought it would be a Republican sweep.
But what about Schimmel? I mean, so it sounds like you think he benefited from the fact that there wasn't a lot of ticket splitting. But could Susan Happ have done something differently, do you think, to draw more voters to her side?
You know, these were candidates who were unknown, both Mary Burke and Happ, and and so the opposition party does opposition research, and they turn their strengths into weaknesses.
Right.
And so what Mary Burke claimed as her strength as being an executive turned out to be something that hurt her at the end
Right.
as the October surprises began to emerge. And the same with Happ.
Okay. That she was somehow soft on crime.
Yeah, she was the biker,
Yeah.
prosecutor who was tough on crime and strong on women's issues.
Okay.
And so, of course, they went after that. It was,
Sure.
swift boating, as it's become.
Right, swift voting. And both sides need to expect that that's going to
Of
happen,
course,
right? So
of
they need
course.
to be ready to respond.
Exactly.
And I think one of the reasons why the Democrats wanted Burke as the candidate was because they thought she had her own personal financing that she could respond to that.
And she did.
And she did.
I mean, but if you look at both parties, the commercials coming out in response to any attack were almost immediate.
By the way, do you think that Burke is now politically dead in Wisconsin? Can you lose a governor's race and come back? I mean, Barrett now has lost twice, so he's history now.
Well, he lost twice, though, so he
Right,
can come
so-
back.
right, yeah.
No, you can probably come back. Both parties have problems with candidates who have lost, so it's going to be difficult to come
Isn't
back.
there a perception, though, of the Democratic Party that they keep nominating for governor Madison-based, moderates to liberals? Do they need to start nominating people for that office that are from other parts of the state? Like I know Kathleen Vinehout had talked about running. She's the senator from the Eau Claire area.
That may be, but the fact is that you have to reach a level of campaign funding that makes your candidacy viable. And I don't think that Vinehout could have done that.
Right.
The Democrats knew that given the fact that the unions had been undercut,
Right.
that they were going to have problems financing any kind of campaign.
Do you think it's time? And you and I have both been involved with third-party politics at various points in our lifetime. One thing that I always liked about third parties is that it's a place where you can hear some big ideas. Is it time for the Democrats to start coming up with some big ideas? Because when I talk to people out there, the major impression that they're getting of the Democrats these days in campaigns is that we're not the Republicans, right? We're not as bad as they are, right? You're not going to persuade a lot of people with that pitch, right? I mean, isn't it time to start coming up with some major, big, game-changing ideas, or is that now not practical in politics?
Well, they had the big game-changing idea, but they ran away from it. I mean, the Affordable Care Act. I mean, Democrats have been pushing health care since 1948,
Right.
since the New Deal. Unfortunately, they chose a Republican idea.
Exactly.
They chose
Right.
nationwide a program that Mitt Romney had successfully implemented
Right.
in Massachusetts.
Right. So it became like a Republican light.
You're right. So instead of a public option for health care, they simply required people to
But the big idea would have been Medicare for all.
it would have been.
And they wouldn't stand for, they just wouldn't do that.
They wouldn't do
right?
that.
Now here's the thing, right? At the time in 2010 when Obama had votes in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, I had people telling me, well, we can't pass Medicare for all because then we'll lose the Congress. So they ended up passing the Affordable Care Act, which is
And
really
they lost the Congress.
And they lost Congress. So, and my theory is, had they passed Medicare for all, it would have been extremely popular, and they would have maintained a majority in that. Because, in the 60s, the Democrats didn't lose any votes because of Medicare.
No.
The Civil Rights Act, they lost votes for, right? They lost the South.
Yeah. Well,
Remember that?
they lost. They've lost the majority of the white vote now since the 70s.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a long-running
Right.
trend. But, again, is it time for them, for example, around the country, even simple things like minimum wage resolutions, they passed everywhere, right? So why didn't the Democratic candidates just have that as their number one issue since it's passing? Just one example locally, minimum wage in Appleton. There was a referendum question advisory, right? City of Appleton, should Appleton adopt a resolution which supports increasing the minimum wage in the state of Wisconsin to $10.10 an hour. 15,800 people said yes, 10,000 people said no. That's in Appleton, which went Republican. Menasha, 3,700 people yes, 25 no. Neenah, 6,000 yes, 3,000 no.
Minimum wage did well across the country. Medical marijuana, there were a number of issues.
Recreational marijuana.
Marijuana, even in several places. Florida, it passed, but didn't get the 60% it needed. There was nowhere where those issues were losing.
Yeah, so explain for us then what seems to be a contradiction between the things people are saying they want and the candidates they're putting in office who don't support those things.
The Democrats were not running on those issues.
Yeah.
They were not. I mean, there was a possibility of a populist campaign on the part of the Democrats, and they were running a very different kind.
So what is it? Are they just too corporate now?
Well, they were running a campaign on efficiency, that they would be able to accomplish what the Republicans were doing, but they would do it without the divisiveness and
civility.
Right.
Yeah.
And the problem was that, given what's happened in Washington, the public just does not believe in government competence. I mean, this was, with Obama, with it comes to the Affordable Care Act and the problems with the site, with Benghazi, all of those things. People just do not believe that the government is competent to do those things which are essential.
So basically, it's the vote for the Republicans this year in some ways was really a vote against government.
Right.
Right.
Because the public is not persuaded that government can do those things that are promised.
And yet, obviously, when any party gets in those kind of majorities, they will govern.
They will govern. They will govern. I mean, at the national level, that won't happen. I mean, we've got gridlock. President Obama has only pocket vetoed 2 bills, and we can expect that, he's going to catch up with previous presidents in the number of vetoes. We can expect executive orders.
Well,
we can expect compensation.
Let's talk about President Obama for a second. Is it time for him just to sit back and start writing his memoirs now? I mean, when Clinton lost the Congress in '94, it seemed to have empowered Clinton. Now, he was a different style of communicator and a different style of politician. Do you expect that Obama will be able to handle being basically the lone Democrat with any power now in Washington, at least for the next 2 years? You think nothing will happen for the next 2 years?
No. There are things that will happen. I mean,
do you think Obama will end up saying, okay, look, I have to deal with this Republican Congress, so he'll have one of these grand deals on Social Security?
No.
That won't happen?
I doubt that happens.
Okay.
I think he's going to be defiant about this. I think he's simply going to, do what the Congress has done, which is try to negate whatever the House and the Senate send to him.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you expect the Republican Congress to send him? Like, let's take a couple of issues. They all claim now that they're deficit hawks, right? Which I think means they want to cut programs, right? I don't know how well, because they don't want to raise taxes, right? So, is there any program there that is popular with the public that they would cut seriously?
Well, I think they will send bills that both houses can agree to forward to the president, knowing he'll
veto them, right? Then they can run in 2016 saying they tried.
President, yeah.
All right. So he's saving them from themselves, right?
Because the implications of many of those bills would,
like the Paul Ryan budget, for example.
Sure,
right? They'll probably pass the Paul Ryan budget.
Well, they'll pass something. Probably not the Paul Ryan budget,
but something similar to it.
Yeah.
But it'll be dead on arrival with
Of
Obama.
course. Yeah.
And then they won't have enough votes in the Senate to actually override a veto, right?
Probably not on most things.
Okay, so what about, say, on immigration reform, which Obama's been pretty clear he wants to see something happen on immigration? Well, this other than like build a massive wall on the southern border, what will this?
Well, the
Congress
Republicans
do?
are divided over that because the business community really wants,
Okay.
migrant workers. They do. The low-wage workers for jobs that many Americans don't want. So, the Main Street Chamber of Commerce type Republicans would like to see some deal made, and other Republicans who, have more serious anti-immigrant or nativist views don't. So there's an eternal struggle within the Republican Party there.
Okay, so, but it sounds like a blueprint for not much happening.
Oh, a lot will happen. I mean, a lot of noise, but
Yeah, a lot of noise,
yeah.
but not actual.
Well, if you look at the very extreme, I mean, with Bill Clinton, they might even move to impeach him over an executive order, an executive agreement that they feel is extra constitutional.
Well, I mean, all the current Republicans claim to admire Ronald Reagan. He almost has like godlike status. Yet on immigration, Reagan was kind of liberal compared to this Congress,
on
right?
taxes, on a whole range of social issues as well.
But Reagan didn't exactly grant amnesty to undocumented immigrants, but it was perceived that way by lots of people. Can you see anything like that happening now? I don't think so.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe.
Okay. What about on foreign policy? I mean, the Republicans have been pretty clear. They think that Obama is ineffective on ISIS, and he can't cure the Ebola virus either. So they ran on a platform of Ebola and ISIS.
Well, in that sense, the public is in agreement that the administration is ineffectual, but the public is also anti-interventionist. I mean, the public does not want to see actual, they've been perfectly happy with the president using drones and indirect, airstrikes, anything that doesn't involve boots in the ground and the actual commitment of American forces. And the Republicans can take advantage of that discontent and that dissatisfaction, but there's no real policy that I think either they or the public at large would actually support.
As far as Syria and things like that goes. So, I mean, what do you predict will ultimately happen? I mean, Obama's been launching airstrikes.
That will continue. I mean, the president is commander-in-chief, and the Congress is in no position to challenge that or...
But they can try and micromanage it, right? And they can make as much political hay out of it as they...
Yeah, but micromanaging usually means that you cut the budget, and in fact, Republicans would like to increase the military budget.
Okay. Well, the Republicans obviously did win control of the Senate, and they ran with candidates that, as you suggest, are very conservative, right?
They are.
Are the Democrats going to pull from that they have to move even further to the center or become more centrist to get back in the majority?
Well, I mean, frankly, the Democrats have lost all those seats. I mean, there are very few Democrats in southern states that aren't majority districts.
Right.
And you look across the country, in all those places where the Democrats lost, they were the more moderate Democrats.
Well, then what lesson should they pull from that, then, the Democrats?
Well, the Democrats, at least those who are incumbents, those who still hold seats, don't have to pull any lessons from it because they're in safe districts, too. I mean, Gwen Moore in Milwaukee, Ron Kind, they're safe.
Yeah, what percentage of members of the House of Representatives in any given election year are...
A declining number.
Yeah.
I mean, the district boundaries have been drawn in such a way that there are very few competitive seats. And in this election, the Republicans won most of those competitive seats.
Well, I mean, historically, is this unique in our history? Have we ever had periods before where it was this rigidly, safe seat partisan?
We have in the 19th century when when there was high turnout and the parties were equally rigid.
But also in the 19th century, we had the Democratic Party and the Whig Party, right? And the Whig Party disappeared, right? And then we created the Republican Party, right?
Over the issue of slavery.
Right. Yeah. So can you see a scenario in the 21st century where one of these major parties, Democrats or Republicans, just implodes?
Well, a realignment and the replacement of a political party requires an issue that is so divisive that, in the era you're talking about, there were two issues that really caused the major party to dissolve. The one issue, of course, for the Whigs was slavery, but also immigration.
Okay.
Am
Well,
I
we
right?
still have the immigration issue.
Well, that's right. And if you recall the movie, and as you should, The Gangs of New York.
Yes.
No, the nativism and
Yeah,
then
exactly.
yeah.
But
So-
in all seriousness, modern political science can scholars envision a scenario in which, I mean, these two parties dissolve? They will always be with us. We're stuck with them forever, even though people claim to hate them.
Well, part is the structure of our elections, the winner-take-all districted elections. You have the parties that devise the rules under which they compete. You have a duopolistic situation, which would require
Right.
almost a major upheaval to replace.
Okay. Well, going forward toward 2016, a lot of Republican potential presidential candidates and Democratic presidential candidates were out there, campaigning. Right. So obviously for the Democrats, it was Hillary Clinton, who was not very successful. I mean, she went out and campaigned heavily for Kay Hagan in North Carolina, who lost.
She lost her book tour.
Yeah, and
I mean, how can you lose a book tour?
Yeah, exactly. She went out and campaigned for the Democratic governor candidate in Maryland,
Right.
who lost.
Yeah.
Obama went and campaigned for Pat Quinn in Illinois. It looks like I don't think he's conceded yet, but it looks like he's lost. What does this say for Hillary and maybe other Democratic candidates that had very little sway?
Well, Rand Paul has his website, Hillary's Losers, all of the people she...
Oh, did he? Did
Yeah.
she have that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, did she have any victories out there?
One.
Who was that? Yeah, just something obscure.
Yeah.
Okay. Chris Christie, however, seemed like everywhere he went.
Yeah. I mean, the projection was, and the only surprises on election night, really, was the number of Democrats who lost their Senate seats. I mean, all the competitive seats, all the ones that were in doubt, seemed to go the Republican way. But the governorships, the expectation was the Democrats might pick up one or two governorships.
Yeah.
They lost
Well,
three.
especially the one I thought they would pick up was Kansas, where Sam Brownback, the Republican governor, had put in the most rigid austerity standards. I mean, almost decimated their education system out there.
The Maryland loss.
Yeah.
And how can Republicans be competitive in Massachusetts and Connecticut?
Yeah, yeah. The Republicans did win Massachusetts,
Yes.
right? So the Democrat was Martha Coakley, who had lost the Senate race to
Right.
Scott Brown.
Martha Chokley now.
Yeah, is that right? So is she just an extremely weak candidate? Do the voters of Massachusetts?
She's not a great candidate, but even so.
Yeah, for the Republicans to win in Massachusetts, that's really saying something.
And the Democrats now in Congress, and this shows the swing really, because all of the House seats were up on Tuesday, and the Democrats are down to 185 seats out of 435.
Yeah, when is the last time? When is the last time they've been that low?
1920s.
You have to go back to the 1920s.
Yes.
All right. So if we get to 2016, and it looks like Hillary's a front runner for president. Oh, by the way, who's challenging her in the Democrats? Maybe Andrew Cuomo from New York?
Probably not.
No, probably not.
Probably not.
Just won't be able to launch a national campaign.
No, I doubt it. There might be some.
No dark horse candidates like Martin O'Malley, the former governor of Maryland?
Could be. Dark horse candidates are
Right.
probably the only
Is
ones.
there like a Jimmy Carter somewhere lurking?
I don't think
Because
so.
no
I
one
mean,
expected Carter in 75.
No,
so,
that's
right?
true. But there were many candidates in that race. And this one
Exactly.
would
So they're basically going to hand it to Hillary, is what it sounds like.
be, I'm thinking there probably will be other candidates, but it will be over with after the Iowa.
She'll have the money, the establishment, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, right?
I don't see anyone who can mount the kind of campaign that could,
Okay.
given the way this is structured now with the caucus, there's no one who can.
Well, and
do
the
it.
good thing about having Hillary as a nominee is how much more dirt can they throw at her? I mean, she has withstood the dirt for now over 20 years.
Yeah, she's been thoroughly vetted.
Yeah, thoroughly,
Yeah.
right? That's why they keep
There's
harping on Benghazi, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But so let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you had Hillary Clinton versus a Chris Christie.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think Christie, even with the bridge gate, I think he runs pretty strong. Or Jeb Bush,
Jeb Bush.
I think runs pretty strong.
Yeah.
Given that the electoral map is different in 2016, voter turnout will be higher. Her name recognition is through the roof, right? Do you see a scenario where she is the first woman president?
I can see that. I really do. I think presidential race is very different from this race. The fact was that she was the primary contender against Barack Obama. She doesn't have any problems of distancing herself from him.
Oh yeah, right. She's already distanced from him.
And she can argue that their health care plans were different. What she was proposing back in 1993 is
Yeah,
so
exactly.
She's the only one that actually has a plan to replace Obamacare if that's expected.
But the Republicans are going to call her a radical, liberal, socialist or something. But in fact, she's a moderate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of the so-called progressive left would like to see a Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders. Do you see either of them getting in just to?
I don't think Elizabeth Warren will do it. Bernie might, but I don't think that he has the resources to actually be a contender.
Okay. Warren might, or maybe not. You don't think? She's very popular.
She's popular. Right. She's charismatic.
Right, and she's a huge supporter of the financial reforms, the Dodd-Frank. Now she's in the minority in the Senate. Do you expect the Republicans to try to repeal the Dodd-Frank?
I do. If not repealing it, gutting it.
Right, but Obama will veto. Right.
Remember that Wall Street does contribute to the Democrats as well as the Republicans.
That's true. That's true. And you've got some moderate Democrats who are probably worrying about their
reelection. When you look at the Obama administration, there were a number of Wall Street people in.
What about the Affordable Care Act? You've talked about that here already tonight. And the Republicans have already voted more than 40 times. Do you expect more votes now to get rid of it?
I think they'll do it piecemeal. Some aspects, many aspects of the Affordable Care Act are extremely popular.
Right.
Not to mention the number of people who have signed up for parts of it.
But to make it work, you have to have the mandate, right? That's where you're getting the money from, the personal mandate. So do you expect that they'll try and repeal? Because if they repeal the mandate, the whole thing's gone.
Well, they're saying now that they will attempt to repeal it, but I think they'll do it in pieces.
All right. Do you think the Affordable Care Act has so far done what the president said it would do? I mean, it only has come into effect fully in January of 2014, but it has reduced the number of uninsured people, definitely.
Sure.
Right?
Of course it has.
And in states that accepted the Medicaid expansion, they're doing even better. Is that correct?
Not only that, those who put up the exchanges, people are signing up for those exchanges, and many of them are getting insurance that they didn't have before.
Right, and even some Republican governors accepted the Medicaid money, right?
Most of them have.
Right. That also, I believe, was on the ballot in was it in Appleton? I think. I don't have it with me, but I think there was a question. I thought it was in Appleton that said should the Wisconsin government accept the expanded Badger Care money, the Medicaid money, and the voters said yes, right? And the reasons for not accepting it are purely ideological. Is that correct?
Well, they're not only purely ideological; they're tactical. They're also
because the feds, for states that accept, to make sure we're clear, for states that accept the Medicaid expansion, the feds cover it 100% the first year, and then it's 90%. After that, right?
Right.
So the actual cost to state taxpayers is not large.
No.
Right.
But from the standpoint of the governor and Republicans, it's like blackmail. That it's like taking federal money to force you to do policy that you don't want to do. Plus, from the perspective that all tax dollars are equal, whether they're federal level, they're still increasing the burden on taxpayers.
Okay. So it sounds like you do think that the new Congress will try and piecemeal.
I do.
This and clearly Obama is going to try and prevent that.
He will.
But
the employer mandate.
Yeah.
Where you have to provide. I'm sure that they would like to repeal that. I'm sure that some of the regulations on insurance companies that it's going to be hard to repeal the requirement that your children are covered until they turn 27, or that the lifetime cap and a variety of those other things. It's going to be difficult to sell those.
Right.
But there are other aspects of the act that they can probably try to make a case for and see if the president will challenge them.
Do you think there's a scenario, Jim, where the Republicans now, with their emboldened majority, and they've got so many loose cannons in there now, is there a scenario where they just turn off so many people that in 2016 it starts to get...
When they've had these majorities in the past,
Yeah.
under Newt Gingrich, after the 94
they
election,
shut the government down.
In 1946, Truman was able to run against the Do-Nothing Congress. They'd passed Taft-Hartley. They'd passed a number of... He called it Do-Nothing, but in fact they did quite a bit. So, yeah, if it's likely to overreach. Even in when Eisenhower was elected in 1952 and brought with him a Republican Congress, there was an overreach there. So
Okay. And then by the late 50s, the Democrats had once again taken majorities.
yeah, actually 2 years later.
2 years later, okay. So it was perceived as an overreach.
It was.
Okay, and that could easily...
That could happen.
That could happen now. Let's go back locally again. And in the 54th Assembly District here in Oshkosh, Gordon Hintz, the Democrat, has been there since 2006. In 2011, he had some very, very well publicized, scandals, if you will. But he was reelected handily in 2012, right?
He was.
Right. But then all of a sudden, in 2014, he has another opponent, Mark Elliott, a political newcomer Republican, but outside money came in this time.
Well, it's also the case that Mark Elliott was a good candidate. He worked extremely hard.
Did a lot of door-to-door campaigning, yeah.
He was at the farmer's market. He was meeting with people.
Right.
I mean, he campaigned the way you have to for an Oshkosh Assembly District, meeting people face to face. So
He wouldn't come on this show, but that's just a side issue.
he's fairly eloquent, so he probably should have come on your show.
Yeah, I think so.
He's articulate. He was a minister, so he is an inspirational speaker. So,
But again, in that race, there was at least $100,000 of outside spending from a group called Americans for Children. That's a pro-voucher group.
pro-voucher group.
Right, so they sensed that Gordon was weak.
I think there were surveys showing that the
He's
race was
beatable.
close and he was beatable. Because I also noticed that the Republican State Committee and the county put up money against Gordon as well.
Right.
They sensed that he was vulnerable.
Right. Did you think that some of these ads were in poor taste, or?
There were a lot of ads,
Yeah.
state, national, local, that were in poor taste.
Right. But do you think any of them went over the top? I mean, I thought they were funny, to tell you the truth. I mean, I could see why Gordon and his supporters would not think that, but
Well,
pretty standard. I mean, by historical standards, they probably were not that over the top.
the race was close before that came out. And I think the outcome wasn't changed significantly by that.
Right. Bottom line, I think it was like a 52 to 48 race.
Yeah, a little bit closer than that.
A little bit
bit closer than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
51-49, let's say. So if you're now Gordon Hintz and you get reelected by that small of a margin, what is that going to mean for his governing in the next 2 years?
Governing.
But he's in the minority, right? They've got 36
seats. Out of 99. You're not governing.
Right.
You're taking a back seat, and you're not even being.
Right.
The Republicans don't need any crossover votes. They don't. There's going to be no attempts to override the governor on any piece of legislation, so they don't need it.
So what does an assemblyman in the minority party do?
Well,
at this point?
if I were in the minority, I would feel ineffectual, and I would wonder whether or not I was doing it much more than taking up a seat. I think perhaps Mr. Hintz, took the seat for granted. It does lean Democratic.
Yeah, it does.
And he didn't, I think, anticipate the quality of the opposition.
Right.
And I think he, especially on campus, he didn't work as hard or as long as he needed to in order to retain a seat. I mean, at the end, of course, I think he realized that to retain the seat, he was going to have to.
Right.
I mean, he's worked very hard in the past. And
Yeah. But in 2016, as we've been saying, it will be a presidential election year.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be harder to unseat Gordon or any
Right.
other Democrat who
Right.
would run for the
Right.
position.
But now again, the Republicans kept harping on his scandals from 2011. Is there a point at which Gordon can just rid himself of that? Is that something the public they've returned him to office, so it seems like the public has forgiven him.
Well, truthfully, in 2012, Mr. Eslinger at the end ran similar commercials.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he didn't have the same amount of money, but he was running radio ads attacking Gordon for the same.
Right.
You know, and I think the longer this goes by, the less
impact it is
going to have.
Right. But if he were to, let's say Gordon were to ever run for U.S. Congress or the state Senate, is this
those would come back.
Those would come
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't see.
Yes.
You know, because frankly, you know, if he runs for higher office for Congress or for Senate or governor, all of a sudden those are new issues. There are a whole set
Exactly.
of voters who haven't heard about them.
Right. And all of a sudden it's new again.
Yeah.
And although, is this a difference between American politics and European politics? I mean, the things that Gordon, you know, was, you know, cited for in Appleton, and then, you know, yelling at the representative in Madison, by international political standards, are those not really mild?
Europeans wonder why much of this matters. Well,
Exactly.
you know, there are French prime ministers and presidents,
Yeah.
Italians that have
openly.
mistresses openly.
So what is it? Is it part of our Puritan heritage of this country?
Among the advanced industrial countries, we are the most moralistic and religious in terms of church membership, church attendance, and so our politics have been moralistic to a greater extent than other countries, almost from the founding.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I've had this discussion with students when we talk about political rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
If you say which of these people has higher character, Bill Clinton or George W. Bush, majorities will always say George W. Bush, right? Because if you say launch wars on what turn out to be, you know, questionable or dubious pretenses, we don't think of that as a character issue, right?
Well, remember-
Character means loyalty to your spouse.
Well, you know, from the standpoint of the people we launched the wars against, they were
Yeah,
Arab countries. So,
right.
so many,
Right.
from the standpoint of those
Right.
who faced our efforts, they were seen as crusades.
Right.
So, therefore, a moralistic effort.
Right, but I mean, I find it refreshing that the current Pope is the Catholic Pope is starting to say that the Church should not just always talk about adultery and abortion, that they should talk about social justice, income inequality, right?
Well, you know that he's been getting some pushback lately
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
conservative cardinals who've
Yeah.
had more or less their way with Catholic theology. And
Right, but I think that if we were to take what he's doing and put it into secular politics, right, could we not say that politicians who stand for, you know, narrowing income inequality, that maybe that is a high character thing to do?
You know, from time to time in the nation's history, there have been great awakenings of social gospel, where what Jesus would do.
Yeah.
You know, if Christ came back, how would he deal with the poor? So,
Right.
you know, the Catholic Church has that welfare, that you know, concern about the poor.
Right, exactly. Well, would Jesus want corporations to run the country? Another referendum question advisory in Appleton, Menasha, and Neenah was called the Move to Amend resolution, and part of it said, we want to amend the U.S. Constitution to say that, one, only human beings, not corporations and limited liability companies, etc., are endowed with constitutional rights. Only people have constitutional rights. And two, money is not speech, and therefore regulating political contributions and spending is not equivalent to limited political speech. In Appleton, that passed by 18,000 to 6,000 votes. And it also passed in Menasha and Neenah.
Well, Tony, the Supreme Court, as early as 1896,
Yeah.
talked about corporation as people with rights. And one of the things we haven't mentioned in this election is the makeup of the Supreme Court, because there could be one or more vacancies in the last 2 years. So
Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think at this point is probably going to hang on. They're going to have to carry her out of there.
well, that at the age of some of the justices,
Right.
that could
I
happen.
mean, if Ginsburg was to retire right now from the court, what are Obama's chances of getting a judge passed at this point? Zero.
Zero.
Right.
I mean, literally, we could probably have a court that has 8 justices for the last
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, we could have that, and this current Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, has explicitly said that corporations are people. Correct. Mm-hmm. All right. So, what do you think of this move to amend thing? You think that's just
Amending the Constitution?
yeah? It's
You know,
hard to do.
I
Of
mean,
course.
when you have overwhelming support for something like the Equal Rights Amendment, and you can't amend the Constitution for that to
Yeah.
say that men and women
And
have
yet,
equal rights?
and yet, in Wisconsin, we were just able to amend the Constitution to protect the road building budget. That is
We
now
were?
the only protected category in the budget. How, was this just not communicated very
Look,
well?
in Wisconsin, we have a right to hunt and fish.
Yeah. But seriously, how do you explain that something like money in the road budget, that got fast-tracked for constitutional amendment?
That's going to be a major player in the state budget because since gasoline taxes are not, I mean, we're driving less, our cars are
Right.
more efficient, you know, the tax is not covering all the infrastructure we need.
Mm-hmm.
When road building becomes a competitor with public schools, higher education, welfare, health,
Right.
you know, corrections, and you have developers and construction companies all, you know, seeking.
But now that is the one part of the budget that can't be rated.
It is,
Yeah.
but it will become part of the other budget that for subsidy.
Well, I mean, it just seems to me that media, ethical politicians need to do a better job of educating the public on what they're voting for. I don't think that referendum would have gotten 80% of the vote if people really understood what it was doing.
Well, Tony, you and I know that most of the investigative journalism happens with newspapers, and
Yeah.
and the papers are in decline in readership. The
Yeah.
amount of investigation they can do.
Yeah, that's true.
Electronic media doesn't do that. They're a derivative of
That's
print
true.
media.
That's true. That's true. We're going to sum up here. It's been a great hour with Dr. Jim Simmons from the UW-Oshkosh Political Science Department. We hope you've learned some about the elections and maybe just reinforce the idea that all of us need to become a little bit better educated about candidates and public issues. The next election cycle will be local elections, correct?
April.
In April, and of course we encourage people to run for city council if they're interested in having an impact on issues locally. For Cheryl Hentz and for our guest Jim Simmons, I'm Tony Palmeri, hoping you'll join us again for another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. Take care.